Hello again, fellow Forgotten History viewers and fans. Your humble narrator, Colin D. Heaton, curmudgeon at large, is currently interviewing Jonathan Crawley, who has a book that he has written, which covers his time in both Ireland and the United States, both as a Marine and as a member of the Irish Republican Army. And I would like to introduce you to Jonathan now, and just everyone, absorb what he has to say is going to be historically important, I believe, as well as, human interest speaks for itself. So, John, tell us about the title of the book and why you wrote it.
Well, the title of the book is called The Yank, and it's based on, well, the title is based on my nickname in the IRA. They had a bad habit, what I would call a bad habit of calling me the Yank, because I thought it pretty well identified me, but it was very hard to shake them from that habit. The book is about my experiences as a U.S. Marine and a member of the Irish Republican Army. I wrote the book partly to challenge a narrative that had been out there that the IRA had fought the British to a standstill, and that the present political situation was what we had fought for, which is an internal settlement on British terms. And I wanted to challenge that narrative a little bit and to remind people what we had been fighting for, that we had been fighting for a national democracy within an all-Ireland republic to permanently and thoroughly break the connection with England, and to build a joint civic identity in this country that was non-sectarian, wasn't Catholic or Protestant, but was based on civic republicanism, much as you have in the United States. In America, you have endless amount of ethnic groups, religions, and diversity, but your motto is "E pluribus unum," from many one.
Mm-hmm.
And we wanted to see the same in Ireland. From our many traditions, well, basically two major traditions, pro-British and pro-Irish, but to meld that together into a joint civic identity and build a national democracy. That hasn't happened so far, and I think a major reason that I wrote the book was to explain, from my perspective and the perspective of a lot of Irish Republicans who agree with me, that that wasn't what we fought for, and that we still have a way to go to achieve our aim of a genuine 32 county all Ireland republic.
Well, great. Well, we'll start out. Tell us about your youth, your connection to both the USA and Ireland, and how you ended up in the United States. Give us that background.
Well, basically, I was born in New York. My mother and father were Irish immigrants. My father was from County Roscommon. My mother was from Kerry. They met in America. My father, when I was born in New York in 1957, my father was in the United States Air Force. He joined partly to get technical training, but also to accelerate his American citizenship, which I believe at that time you could do so by joining the military. So I was actually born when he was in the U.S. Air Force. When I was about 2 years old, my father had left the Air Force. We moved to Chicago. So I basically grew up in Chicago. Went to school there. Went to Catholic schools, typical Irish American,
Yeah.
boyhood. There was no overt political discussion in my house about anything really. I mean, Ireland was referred to as home, and I always heard it referred to as home. But I didn't view it as home at the time. But when I was 14, we moved back to Ireland. My parents had longed to go there. And I went to school in Ireland, and I rapidly gained a great love for Ireland. I immersed myself in the country, loved everything about it. And I gradually politicized myself in the sense that for my own reading and things like this. Now, when I say I politicized myself, I have to emphasize I didn't radicalize myself. Sometimes this term radicalization is used. I never shifted my political opinions from one end of a spectrum to another end. I grew up in America believing in a democracy and a democracy and a republic that had fought the British to achieve their freedom. And I believed Ireland had the same right to achieve the same freedom from Britain. So having politicized myself, I decided I was going to join the IRA, but I didn't know anybody in the IRA. It wasn't called a secret army for nothing. I mean, I had no mentor. I had nobody encouraging me in this. This was totally from my own personal initiative and my own personal, what I saw as my own duty, as I interpreted my duty within my own personal belief systems. Uh, Even going back to the States again, we used to say pledge allegiance to the flag every morning. And, words from that, resonated with me. The republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I believed in those words, and I believed that Ireland should also have that. So I would have joined the IRA when I was 18, but I didn't know anybody in the IRA, like I said. So I made a decision that because I'd been born in America and I was allowed to join the American military, that I would join the U.S. Marines and come back after 4 years and join the IRA. Now, I had two reasons for that. One was to enhance my professional development, to get military training and experience. And the other was to test my commitment, because I knew if I came back after 4 years and joined the IRA, then I was committed to doing so, because I knew it was a big step, and I knew it was, potentially, very dangerous step. And I did join the Marines, and I did see it through. And in fact, I joined the Marines in May 1975 when I was 18. I got out of the Marines on the 29th of May 1979 at 8 o'clock in the morning, and at 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was a connecting flight from Norfolk to New York to catch a flight to Ireland. And I immediately went home, and it took a few months, but I was eventually able to join the IRA.
So, what was your primary motivation for joining the IRA, and how did you actually get into the IRA? That's not an easy thing to do.
No, it wasn't. My primary motivation was to achieve the full freedom and independence of Ireland. And I believe the IRA at that time were the only ones really seriously, challenging the British presence in Ireland, challenging the British Army and the British jurisdiction. Getting into the IRA, it was difficult. I knew it would take initiative and resolve. I had been in Marine Recon. I ended up a sergeant. I got um, three meritorious promotions. I ended up a sergeant. I became an instructor at the Amphibious Reconnaissance School. So I believed I had shown the qualities of initiative and resolve in the Marines. And I believed that I also showed those qualities in trying to get into the IRA, because it did take initiative and it did take resolve. But eventually I became aware of a man who'd been a Republican prisoner. He was in a building project. He had left the Republican movement. He was no longer a member, but I got a job there, and I kind of, I kind of, I kind of stayed close to him, asked him a lot of questions. I mean, he rapidly guessed my intentions, and he did try to talk me out of it. I mean, he did genuinely try to talk me out of it, and he said, it'd be a bad move, and the only thing you're guaranteed is death or prison, really. But I was absolutely determined. So he must have said it to somebody, because eventually an IRA man, he didn't tell me he was the IRA at the time, but he was, from County Tyrone, approached me, and we began a conversation that took, some weeks, maybe 2 or 3 months of, lectures, conversations, things like that. And they were checking out my background, but eventually I was sworn into the IRA.
Now, I know you can't discuss how that happened because
Yeah.
that's a classified information that we don't violate OPSEC. But so, what exactly did you give the IRA that they didn't have, and what do they want from you that you could provide?
Well, that's a very good question, because to put things in context, I didn't join the Marines and Marine Recon with the notion that I was going to come back and somehow provide this experience to the IRA that was needing this experience. I had heard and I believed that the IRA was this highly professional, highly sophisticated guerrilla organization. I mean, I kept hearing about this, and I believed that. And I kept hearing about it from the Brits. The British were constantly saying this, that they were the most, lethal, most dedicated, and they were dedicated, but most highly trained guerrilla organization, nearly in the world. But when I joined, I was shocked to find out that it was a very amateurish and ad hoc organization. That the volunteers on the ground and what we call the active service units were very keen to learn, military techniques, tactics, and procedures that could enhance their ability to carry on the struggle against the British Army. But at a leadership level, I found that there was no real respect for training or anything like that. In fact, I felt that when I was making suggestions, I was basically bothering them. I was very surprised, like that, coming from a culture like the U.S. Marines, who look on training like the Spartans looked on training, where
Mhm.
war is what you do between training. You know what I mean? And I was now dealing with people at a leadership level in the IRA who were telling me, "Ah, sure, you could train a monkey to shoot." You know what I mean? And I remember saying, "Well, you can teach a monkey to point and pull, but you can't teach a monkey sight picture, sight alignment, and trigger control. You can't teach a monkey how to move, shoot, and communicate as part of a cohesive team." So that was a real shock to me. That was a real culture shock to me that there wasn't a greater emphasis on the importance of training uh, at a leadership level. On the ground, there was, but um, after a while, I was talking to various fairly prominent people in the IRA who were at an operational level, and they were asking me questions, and I was starting to maybe just get into a situation where maybe I could be of some, genuine help in improving training, improving equipment, and operational ability. And then all of a sudden, I got called to a meeting by Martin McGuinness, and I was told to go to the States to set up a network to buy guns. And he told me, and he said to me that because I had an American accent, I'd be useful over there going to gun shops to buy guns, you know. And I was very, very, very taken aback by that because, I had been an instructor in a Marine amphibious reconnaissance school,
Mhm.
and I thought I had a lot more to offer the IRA than my accent. And anyway, there was lots of people in America with American accents who could have gone in. I mean, we only needed 4 or 5 different types of weapons. I could have wrote it on the back of an envelope and sent it over there.
Mm.
So, I thought it was ridiculous, and and to me, it was very much disheartened me about the direction they were going. So I arrived in Boston with a $5 bill that was torn in an erratic manner. My contact there had the other half of this bill, so we were able to establish our bona fides, that we were the right people in touch with each other. He was an upstanding citizen. He didn't have any criminal connections whatsoever, but he knew who some of the leading criminals were because he was from Southie his whole, he lived and worked in Southie his whole life. So I told him we needed, fake driver's licenses and resources like that to go into gun stores and buy guns. At the time, actually, New York driver's license was the best because at the time it had no photograph on it. But anyway, his son-in-law put me in touch with a guy who said he could probably get that type of stuff called Whitey. I had never heard of Whitey. I mean, I didn't know who he was. I was never in Boston in my life. Unlike now, where there's books and movies about Whitey, I mean, I had just never heard of the guy. Just before I went in to meet him in Triple O's bar in an office upstairs, I said to the guy who was bringing me, I must ask Whitey this, ask Whitey that. And he says, "Oh God, don't call him Whitey. Don't call him Whitey to his face. It's Jim. Call him Jim." So I said, "Well, I'm glad you told me that because I thought his name was Whitey." You know what I mean? So I went in anyway, and I met him. And I remember the first impressions were good. He came across. He was very he carried himself very well. I had been about 25 at the time. He'd have been about 54, I'd say, just roughly. But he was very fit. You could tell he worked out. He was very well dressed. He had the typical 80s gear on, Calvin Klein jeans, cowboy boots. Remember, I remember he's wearing a short leather jacket, manicured nails, very chest out, shoulders back, carried himself very well, spoke quite knowledgeably, impressed me as an intelligent guy. And remember, at this stage, I didn't know anything about this guy, nothing, except that I gathered he was willing to break the law because he was able to get us licenses and stuff. So I was actually with another IRA guy there. He had been shot in active service and he was over there recuperating. So me and him were together for a little while. So about a week after that, we were staying in a house with IRA sympathizers in South Boston, and Whitey came over with Pat Nee, um, Steve Fleming, and Kevin Weeks. Of course, I didn't know at the time who they were. And they brought a big duffel bag with them. So we were talking for a while, and after a while of chit chat and rapport, Whitey gave me, I think, $5,000 as a donation. Now, as far as I know, that's all we were going to get from the guy, but it was more than a lot of people gave. So I was happy enough to get it, and I told him we needed licenses and that. He got a bit animated then, and he said he was going to get somebody to steal a license making machine from the Massachusetts state, wherever they made licenses, But
Mhm.
that resource never arrived. But he seemed motivated to help us. Then they opened up the duffel bag and it contained, an assortment of weapons, pistols, rifles. I mean, there was an AK-47 there, or a folding stock Chinese AK-47 that Pat Nee, he'd been a former U.S. Marine, and he said it had been got in Vietnam and somebody brought it home and they were donating it to us, which was okay. And then uh, but it was really Pat Nee. I have to emphasize, it was Pat Nee. Pat Nee had been born in Rossmuck in Ireland. He was from an Irish-speaking household. They spoke fluent Irish in his house. Now, he forgot the language after he emigrated to America, but I remember being in his kitchen in South Boston, and his parents in the next room, like speaking fluent Irish, like fluent Gaelic, like. Um, Pat was very proud of his American citizenship, but very proud of his Marine Corps uh, experience and all that. Very proud. At the time, I didn't tell him I'd been in the Marines. I waited a while because I wanted to get to know these guys a bit better. We didn't give our real names or anything like that, and I didn't tell them I'd been in the Marines or anything. But after a while, after I got to know Pat better, and began to trust him, I told him I was in the Marines, and we hit it off. We had a pretty good bond. For all the talk about Whitey, it was really Pat Nee. Whitey gave the nod, but it was Pat Nee took us under our wing, did all the heavy lifting, did most of the work with us, and was with us more or less on a day-to-day basis. I remember at our first meeting with Whitey, in that meeting in that house, he said, "You guys look like a couple of micks just off the boat." So he gave Pat Nee some money, and the next day went out and bought us cowboy boots and Calvin Klein jeans, also we blend in. But it kind of took off from there, and Whitey didn't have a real hands-on role, but him and Steve Flemmy, his right-hand man, Steve Flemmy, would come up in the evenings, uh, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, just to, talk and debrief. And I remember I used to struggle to stay awake because I'd be up early and we'd be out all day or maybe running around the country all day. But Whitey was like a vampire. He came out at night, you know what I mean? And he'd be like holding court till 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm fighting not to fall asleep, but I knew that if I fell asleep or anything like that, it would look really bad. We couldn't alienate this guy. He was helping us. So I remember, really fighting to stay awake. But he was a take charge type of guy. He was clearly the figure of authority when their group was together. He did most of the talking and all. But it was really Pat and he did the work. And yeah.
Well, how did you get the weapons to Ireland?
Well, we didn't. We were caught on a boat called well, what happened was after so many months, see, I got a very strange phone call from Ireland. We had got a freighter and we were getting a freighter together. And the long-term plan was we were going to find a genuine cargo to take to Europe 2 or 3 times a year. I don't know. They were talking about cement and different things. Well, it hadn't. I'm no shipping magnate, so this a lot of this stuff was over my head. But the basic idea was 2 or 3 times they would take a cargo to Rotterdam or someplace and unload it. It would help fund the operation. But maybe 3 times a year we would meet an Irish fishing boat off the coast of Ireland and unload guns,
Hmm.
and then they continue on. So on their genuine mission. But I got a very strange message. A friend of mine, Liam Ryan, went home. He was later murdered by British military intelligence, but he went home, met members of leadership, and then came back with a message for me. It's called a com. It was a message written on a small piece of, in small writing, on a piece of cigarette paper wrapped in cellophane. And it told me to call a phone box at a certain time in Dublin at a certain time and day. Now, that was very unusual. And of course, there was no mobile phones, but cell phones back then. So I called and I was told, come home now, bring everything, and you be on the boat. And it was a really strange call to get because we didn't have anything. We didn't have any equipment that was going to change anything in the IRA. We didn't have anything of strategic nature, that was going to, shift the balance of power in Ireland or anything like that. I mean, it was just small arms. I thought it was very strange. But because the freighter we were working on wasn't ready, we had to get Pat Nee and other guys got a guy called Bob Anderson who had fished North Atlantic sword fishing. They agreed he agreed for a certain fee to take the guns across. So to make a long story short, we took the guns across in the Valhalla. We hit a hurricane halfway across. I describe it in the book. It just savage hurricane. Anybody who's ever seen the movie Perfect Storm,
Hmm.
I mean, it's just like that. Even the boat was the same. I mean, it's like just like the storm in that. But we survived, clearly, but barely. Got through, and then we transferred the guns to a boat called the Marina Anne that had come out from Ireland, 200 miles off the coast, and then we were arrested by the Irish Navy going in. Now, our guns were seized, and me and 3 other guys on the Marina Anne got 10 years in prison. But when the IRA, I remember, was investigating how we were arrested, they kept sending word into the prison you know, implication being that I trust the wrong person or talk to the wrong person. But I remember thinking, well, hold on a minute. The Irish Navy was waiting behind the Skellig Rocks, which are off the coast of Kerry, because we were going to Kenmare Bay. Neither me nor anybody in America knew we were going to Kenmare Bay, but the Irish Navy knew, and I know I didn't tell them, and
Mm.
nobody in America then could tell them. So we found out later that the informer was Sean O'Callaghan, a senior member of the Irish Southern Command who'd been working for MI5 and the Garda Special Branch for years. And he told them we were coming, but it wasn't him told me, come now, bring everything and you be on the boat. So I believe that there was another agent involved, but I never found out who gave me that message. And to this day, I don't know. I probably never will know. So the whole thing was ridiculous.
Well, with regard to the time you spent in prison, where was that? And what was it like being an IRA prisoner in an Irish, or was it a British prison?
No, well, I was in two. My first prison sentence, I did 10 years in Portlaoise prison in Ireland in the south. And it was a rough prison regime. It was their maximum security prison. I got 10 years for the arms charges, and then I got 3 years for an attempted escape in 1985. We had to get through 12 gates. We got through 11, and the explosive charge we put in the last gate actually buckled the gate instead of opening it. So we got an extra 3 years for that. So with remission and all, I actually did 10 years. That was rough enough, but I was only out 20 months. So I went into prison in September 1984. I came out in September 1994, just a few months after 2 weeks after the IRA ceasefire in August 1994. But the IRA campaign started again in February, I think 90, I think it was 96, I think, 95, 96, started up again. I went to England in active service. I was involved in an operation to take out 6 major substations ringing London to bring commerce in that city to a halt for a period of time. It was an economic target. But again, I believe we were informed on it there as well. So I got, me and my 5 companions, we got 35 years in prison for that. And I eventually got released under the Good Friday Agreement. So that's, or else I'd still be in prison to this day.
Mm.
But so I did. So being a prisoner in Ireland was tough enough at times, but being a prisoner in England, an English prison, was real rough. That was real rough because a lot of the prison officers, we call them screws. A lot of the screws or prison officers were former British soldiers themselves who'd served in the north of Ireland. So there was a lot of tension. It was quite bad. But like I said, I was supposed to do 35 years there, and I ended up. I've been sentenced to a total of 48 years in prison, and of the 40 years, I ended up doing only 14 and a half, 10 of them in an Irish prison, and four in an English prison.
Now, when you're an Irish prisoner, a member of the IRA in an English prison,
Yeah.
do you have like a protective cordon? Do you have like a nucleus of fellow prisoners that protect each other?
Yeah, well, we were in England. We were in what they call the special security unit, and in the English prison system at the time, there were, I believe, 68,000 prisoners in the United Kingdom. 18 had what they call AAA category status, called exceptional risk. Of the 18, 15 were IRA men. You know what I mean? So they had a special prison in the prison built for us, a special security unit, which was a prison inside another prison with its own walls, its own regime. So it was like being buried alive in a concrete coffin. I mean, they nearly had to mail you daylight in an envelope. I mean, it was just a very oppressive regime. We were considered to be. They told us we were a threat to the UK national security, and that we were never gonna get out or anything like that. Which at the time it looked like that. But it was rough. But I mean, at the end of the day, as to say, you pay your dime and you take your chances. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
We were at war with them, and if they catch us, and they're not going to treat us with kid gloves. And that's what we expected, and that's what we got.
Well, as far as that experience, after you were released, when were you released? And tell people about the Good Friday Agreement.
Well, I was actually released in May 2000, and otherwise I'd still be in jail. And now I was glad to be released. And people sometimes say to me, "Well, you should be grateful for the Good Friday Agreement because you got out." But I would be more grateful if the IRA wasn't a reliable informers and we hadn't been caught in the first place, to be honest with you, and that we successfully completed our mission. The Good Friday Agreement is an agreement between the London and Dublin governments. It's an internal settlement in which Britain is basically in the driver's seat. And under the Good Friday Agreement, uh, there is um, there is an avenue towards United Ireland, but it's a very notional thing. It's totally constrained by an intricate web of constitutional constraints that only the British can judge and adjudicate. Uh, Only a British Secretary of State, an English politician who has no vote in Ireland, nobody's voted for him in Ireland, only he can decide if they ever call a border poll. Uh, he decides the criteria. Nobody knows what that criteria is.
Mm.
He decides the wording of the poll, and the final decision of whether the poll is valid must be made at Westminster. Now, ostensibly, it's supposed to be a border poll when more than 50% of people in the 6 counties they believe might support United Ireland. But as Republicans, we've always taken a national view of the national question. And the Northern Ireland state was a gerrymander in the first place. It's a minority in Ireland that was made into an artificial majority by the unilateral act of Britain partitioning Ireland, which had no input and no say from the Irish people. But on top of that, the British are now talking about super majorities and moving the goalposts, where maybe down the line, if it looks like there might be a majority in favor of United Ireland, the Brits might change the law. Well, you're going to have not 50+1, you're going to have maybe 60, 70%. You know what I mean? A super majority. So they're already talking about that. So I don't think the British have any notion of leaving. I think it's like Gibraltar in Spain. They want that bridgehead in Spain because it's a strategic position for them, and they want that bridgehead in Ireland because it's a strategic position for them to the North Atlantic and that. Also, their submarine fleet, when their nuclear submarine deterrent, when it leaves Fastlane in Scotland, it has to go through the North Channel between Ireland and Scotland, and they don't want any independent state, controlling the western flank of that channel. They have a lot of strategic reasons, and they've recently come out with a document I mentioned earlier called "Closing the Back Door," in which they blatantly say we have a major strategic interest in remaining in Ireland. So even though the Good Friday Agreement has been sold as a possible democratic and peaceful constitutional way to Irish unity, the reality of it is that the Brits have it boxed off in every direction. They'll make decisions, and they never will, I believe, make that decision. Like, I need to emphasize that I didn't come in with some notion of myself that I was going to change things for the better. I didn't think they need to be changed. That's not why I joined. Nor did I think that I was in any way, this valuable asset. I mean, I went to jail for 10 years and the world still turned. The IRA continued without me. I mean, I wasn't in any way delusional like that. But it was clear that they were lacking very much in the basics. You see, the IRA had very, very, very few people who had professional military training, very few, and they were basically armed amateurs. I was out on. I talk about an operation in the book where they were basically heavily armed civilians. There was no military. I never saw any training whatsoever, for example, in basic military tactics. Now, the IRA did have a very good engineering department, and they were making a wide variety of improvised explosive devices, mortars, booby traps, things like that. And I think the fact that from 1979 to the ceasefire in 1994, half of all British soldiers killed in the Troubles were killed in 12 bomb attacks. So it wasn't really, small arms or anything like that were very effective. Also, another thing that really surprised me was their lack of knowledge on British military equipment and capabilities. Like, for example, in the early 80s, the British Army got in the hard jacket, a ceramic plate jacket. And, the rumor went around that the entire jacket was impervious to high velocity rifle fire, which it wasn't. It was only the ceramic plate part of it was. And also, I was repeatedly told that the British Army helmet was bulletproof to high velocity rifle fire. And I was hearing this constantly, and I just couldn't figure where this was coming from. But I did know that it had a very, very intensive attritional effect on our operational effectiveness, because men were saying, well, there's no point going out and shooting at the enemy. Again, I just let me emphasize that I'm not glorifying or I don't want to dismiss the shooting or killing of anybody. It's never a good thing. It's not a good thing to do. But I mean, there was a war on, and there were military factors that had to be considered, and these were part of them, and this, so you had young guys going out there. Um, Sometimes they have a fully automatic weapon, and like a Rambo movie, they're always going to fire in full auto. The weapon's never zeroed in. They believe the Brits are bulletproof from head to toe. So that then sort of forced the IRA more into more like attacks involving explosives and all, which sometimes was effective, but also was much more endangered civilians. You
Mm.
know, you don't want to be endangering civilians. So I'm sorry if I'm a bit all over the place in this, Colin, but I'm trying to remember back years ago. But and I had an avalanche of impressions, when I joined the IRA, coming from the Marines to the IRA. There's an avalanche of impressions, and the shock that I had about how actually unprofessional a lot of it was. Now, on the other hand, there was tremendous bravery, tremendous commitment. I mean, 12 men died in hunger strike, 10 in the H blocks, and 2 died in England. I mean, there was tremendous courage and bravery, and people suffered an awful lot. They went, it was a life of hardship, poverty, and sacrifice, and you had some real, genuine patriots involved. But we suffered from a lack of, I think, a more professional military leadership, or leadership that took a more professional view. And when I say that we had very few people with professional military training, there was a lot of people in the IRA who'd been in the British Army, who had been in the Irish Army, and even the French Foreign Legion. But there was never a skills audit done to put those heads together and develop a proper training regime, develop lesson plans, training aids and things like that that would have improved us. I mean, yeah, I know we don't have all day, but and I don't want to come across like people were stupid. They weren't stupid. They just weren't trained. I mean, if you put me in a space shuttle, I couldn't fly it. Does that mean I'm stupid? It just means
Right.
I'm not trained. It just means I'm not trained. And these guys, some very intelligent guys, people that I believe would, had they been in the American military, some of them would have been very good special forces operators. They were that caliber, that intellect and courage and ability. But without the training, without the military leadership that we needed, uh, it was a big problem. And I come to the conclusion after a number of years that there were certain people in the IRA that I believe the Brits had put on their protected species list because they weren't treating people up to a standard or a level. They were kind of keeping them there, not having them arrested, not having them killed, because they were never. You see, no army can rise above the limitations of its leadership,
Right.
no matter how good your men are. You know, Napoleon said it, I think, best. There's no bad regiments. There's only bad colonels.
Hmm.
And leadership is everything, and leadership by example is everything. And anybody who's been in the Marines, or I imagine any military unit, will know that it's leadership by example. And we didn't have a very good example for all the good people we had, and the sacrifices that were made, and the determination that was there. There was too many weak links. Too many weak links.
So do you believe that the leadership of the IRA, now we're talking about the real IRA, the provisional IRA?
Oh, provisional IRA. We're talking about the provisional IRA that I was in, uh, say between 1980 and 19, and well, I resigned from them around, well, after when I got out of jail the second time around 2007.
Hmm.
I resigned from the Republican movement. I joined Sinn Féin later on in my thing, but I was always with the Provos. I was never with any other group. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Yeah.
The real IRA and that they didn't exist then.
Right.
They didn't exist until I'm not sure, the early 2000s, I think.
So did you feel that the IRA was crippled by a lack of technical leadership, or were they too focused on political issues rather than the paramilitary methodology?
Well,
What's your
that
interpretation?
well again, that's a very good question. Now it was a political struggle, and you have
Hmm.
to be focused on political issues. It is fundamentally a political struggle, and I was totally for a political activity as well. But if you're fighting a war, you need to have some manner of military competence and ability. And all I can say is that I found out in a number of crucial leadership positions that wasn't seen as an important factor to them. You know, and I began to suspect that in some circles we may have been kept back militarily because they didn't want a response from the British that would have maybe got them arrested and jeopardized their leadership positions. I think for some, now not all, there were good people there, but I think for some, their positions in the movement meant more than what the movement was fighting for. I firmly believe that. No, I can't, I can't go into detail on that, but I had a lifetime of experience at it. A lot of people, my friends, agree with that too. Um, some of it was inexplicable. I mean, when weaknesses in training and weaknesses in other operational aspects were brought to them, and nothing was ever done about it. Yeah, after a while, you have to ask yourself why.
Hmm.
You know, but you see, what really camouflaged a lot of that was our the way we were the way we were segmented into secret groups. There was no overall picture, right?
Hmm.
Now, the only people that I know now that had an overall picture all the time was British military and intelligence. They knew what was going on. They knew who was in leadership, and they had a good insight into the organization. In fact, I mean, I don't know some of your listeners how much they'd be aware, but Freddie Scavatici, codename Steak Knife. There's been a big books about him lately, and the case about him. Freddie Scavatici was the head of IRA security. He was in charge, the head man of the IRA, who was charged with finding informers. He was working for British intelligence himself.
Hmm.
He was an agent for British military intelligence, the Force Research Unit, and for MI5 for years. And for a while, he was even vetting IRA recruits. When he joined the IRA, Freddie Scavatici was putting people through and then telling the Brits the next day who was joining the IRA. So there were a lot of problems there. Of course, this is all in hindsight. We didn't know this at the time. We were a very heavily infiltrated organization. But again, the vast majority of people were sound, dedicated patriots. And I know a lot of people, would have a different view of the IRA. But from my perspective, they were dedicated patriots. But it only takes a handful of the wrong people
Hmm.
in the right places to put this poison into the organization, which I believe they did.
So no matter how effectively you might have been utilized as an asset, the poison was at the top. It wouldn't have mattered.
It wouldn't have mattered, and the top had no interest in anything I had to contribute. That's what I felt. See, when I joined the IRA, I didn't want to be training people and stuff. I had been training in the Marines, and I wanted to operate as a soldier. But a lot of people were saying to me, guys on the ground, well, when I'd be talking to boys, simple things like, you should zero that rifle in. And they'd be saying, what do you mean zero it in? What does that mean? You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I'd be explaining it, and guys, it didn't take a genius to figure out. Well, maybe everybody should be taught that. Don't fire on full automatic. Aim the bloody thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But no, it just when I was sent to the States, and I know you'll get to that, the Boston thing and the whole Whitey Bulger thing. Um, I was very taken aback, like that I had what I believe were knowledge resources that could be used, and all that they thought I could contribute was my accent. You had American accents, you can go in a gun store and buy guns. We had no end of people in America with American accents could go in and buy a gun. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
just, to me, looking back on it, it's just inexplicable.
Now, how exactly did you facilitate? Did you actually buy weapons or have people work with you to buy weapons? And then did you get them to Ireland or?
I bought very few weapons personally, actually, for all the talk about me having an American accent, because when I got over to the States, it was mostly going into gun stores and buying
Mhm.
guns. You know what I mean? See, before that, shipments had come in from the States, and I seen a quartermaster's book on one shipment that came in, and it was like Woodmaster rifles and hunting rifles, and it was 303, and it was shotguns. And I remember saying, for Christ's sakes, every single gun store in America sells AR-15 or
Mhm.
HK-91. We buy military weapons. Um, Part of the problem too, and this was a real problem that I saw, was that you could have 8 IRA men on an operation. Every man has a different weapon. Every weapon's a different caliber. You know, the weapons, they might have one magazine, and the magazine might be half full. I mean, it was just there was no need for it. It was just as easy to do it the right way as the wrong way. You know, and standardizing our weapons would have helped us our logistical issues, and also our training issues. I mean, it's very hard to go in a training camp when you have 8 different rifles in the camp, and then when the men go to do an operation, they're working with a ninth one, you know. So, like I said, it wasn't rocket science stuff. It would have been a very simple thing to fix. But I remember being told by a member of the IRA leadership that getting in a wide range of weapons and a wide variety showed the people that we could get in a wide variety of stuff and that it was good for morale. And I remember thinking, I mean, this is madness. Like, what's good for morale is effective operations and winning the war. That's what's good for morale, not having a mishmash of weapons and a mishmash of calibers and the men not even half trained on them, you know. But so that was my impression. That was my experience. And like I said, I don't want to come across as, I didn't want to come across as a know-all. I didn't want to come across that people were stupid because they certainly were not stupid, but they weren't trained, and they weren't trained not because they didn't want the training, because people at a higher level, I believe, didn't value it.
Do you believe they didn't value the training, or do you believe that the MI5 infiltrators resented the training to make you least keep you least effective?
Well, I believe there was a bit of both in that because, as I said, our head of security for years was a British agent.
Mhm.
And when you look back now at the things he was doing and how he undermined the movement in so many ways, I mean, anybody who thinks Scapitici was the only one or living on a different planet,
Mhm.
you know. And I mean, the CIA have had people infiltrate them. Russian. They've had Russian agents. The FBI. I think at one stage the head of the FBI, anti-Russian section was a Russian spy himself.
Yeah.
CIA have recruited KGB, MI6, everybody's recruiting everybody. You know what I mean? And, in the IRA, we're going along, like, humming along as if, well, nobody's infiltrated us. We're pure. Nonsense. We were completely compromised, I believe, completely compromised. But, and I think part of it shows where we are today. And I know people say we have peace, and I'm not against the peace. I support the peace, and I'm not advocating a return to armed struggle. But my criticism is of the process, because the process that we're in now cannot lead to the All Ireland Republic we fought for. The process now under the Good Friday Agreement, or the United Ireland they're talking about, is actually keeps the sectarian dynamic intact. It keeps the British-Irish cleavage and national loyalties intact. You can be British or Irish in the so-called United Ireland. I mean, we were fighting to end that division. I mean, you look at India. India has the world's largest republic, 2.1 billion people,
Mm.
2,000 ethnic groups, 15 official languages, I believe, recognized in the constitution, and they're one republic. Ireland, half the population of metropolitan London, right, with two basic traditions that can't get together because there's a foreign government in our country underwriting and manipulating a minority to stop that. So, this is all part of the problem. And until that we end British interference in the internal affairs of Ireland, I don't think we're ever going to have. We have pacification, but and pacification is a process, but I don't really have peace. You have peace when you've dealt with the root cause of any potential violence. That hasn't been done. The British jurisdiction in Ireland is still intact. British interference in Ireland internal affairs is still ongoing. You still have that Protestant Catholic loyalist unionist cleavage in the north, and they're even talking about keeping that intact if there ever is a United Ireland. So most Republicans wouldn't look on that as peace. Now I know some people will say, "Oh, that's semantics and that's pedantic, and nobody's being killed. Who cares?" But in Irish history, when you leave all these loose threads flying in the wind, they have a tend to unravel further in time, and you never know what could happen down the road. So, I'm a believer in genuine peace, and a genuine peace that deals with the root cause of violence in Ireland, which is British jurisdiction and British presence in our country, which has always been the root cause of it.
Tell us why you wrote the book.
Well, like I said, I wrote the book because, I had been very frustrated by, many things I was hearing. And, for example, this thing that the IRA was this professional organization that fought the Brits to a standstill, and the whole Good Friday Agreement, was something that had been negotiated between the IRA and the Brits. It wasn't. The IRA had no involvement in those negotiations whatsoever. I mean, that was negotiated between the London and Dublin governments, and it was an
Mhm.
internal settlement on British terms. And when I say British terms, people voted on it. That's true. But no matter what the Irish people vote on, a border poll someday, maybe for Irish unity, if a border poll is ever called, uh, under the Good Friday Agreement, a border poll can only be called by a British Secretary of State. Now, this is an English politician who sits in the British cabinet. This guy doesn't have one vote in Ireland. He doesn't have a single vote in this country, but only he can call a border poll, and he decides the criteria, which are mysterious. Nobody knows what the criteria are. He decides who qualifies the vote. He decides the wording of the poll, and the Parliament at Westminster must decide whether the poll is valid. So even though people tell you, well, the Irish people support the Good Friday Agreement, and they do, I have no doubt about that. The fact of the matter is that only the British can make the political decision. No Irishman, elected or otherwise, can call a border poll an Irish union in this country. And can't imagine there's too many Americans would accept that as a definition of democracy. You know
No,
what I mean?
no, that
So
wouldn't work.
yeah. Now and then
That
people say, the way they turn it back on us, Colin, say, oh, well, you must support war because you don't support the peace process. I support the peace. I don't support the process. Um, uh, there's no need for war anyway. There never was need for war in this country. I mean, there's 32 counties in Ireland. Unionists are only majority in 2 of the 32 counties. In 2 of the 6 counties to make up so-called Northern Ireland, they're only majority in 2 counties. Yet they're able to stop any progress towards unity. Um, they have this veto, but they only have the veto not on the basis of their strength of argument, but on the strength of the United Kingdom government,
mhm.
military and financial, subsidizing of their veto. So in 1918, there was a total. I remember in 1990, the Peter Brook, who at that time was the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, said that the British government wasn't against a 32 county All Ireland Republic. They were against the violent expression of it. But in 1918, in December 1918, there was a 32 county election where the Irish people voted overwhelmingly for an Irish Republic. 76% of Irish people voted for a 32 county United Ireland. And the British responded with partition, and they responded with the Black and Tans.
Mhm.
That was their answer to that democratic decision. So basically what the British have done in Ireland, and they've done it over like 200 years, that they have shaped the strategic environment here to suit them. The whole democratic setup in Ireland, what they call the democratic setup, is really set up by them to suit them. I mean, if you join with them in their system, you have to follow by their rules. You know, people, the Brits, in fairness to the British, they don't mind Irishmen opposing them. They don't mind. They will even pay Irishmen salaries and expenses and a pension to oppose them, provided they do so within their rules and within their political framework, like at Stormont that you have today. You know what I mean? So you have people who would have been one-time Republicans, in Sinn Féin. I don't consider them Republicans anymore, but they're in Stormont now, running the Northern Ireland state for the Brits. They're on the British payroll. They're on the British pensions list, um, and they are. They claim they're opposing Britain, but Britain's paying them to oppose them. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
So, there's all this. And again, I don't want to be coming across like I'm against peace. I'm not against peace. Like I do support the fact that there's no armed struggle. I'm happy with that. But I'm very worried about the process, because I think the process is very much geared towards maintaining the divisions through which Britain has historically manipulated our population through sectarianism and through the British-Irish cleavage and national allegiances. That's still there, and that they intend to keep that intact in the so-called New Ireland or United Ireland under the Good Friday Agreement. Now, the British have recently come up with 2 papers only in the last month or two. One is called, I think it's called Closing the Back Door. It's written by Policy Exchange, the #1 think tank in London, and they're saying that they're going to have to actually increase their presence in the north, their military presence in the north, because they think it's strategically vital to guard approaches in the North Atlantic. And there was also a paper put out called the Command Paper, put out the British government in January, called Safeguarding the Union, in which they talk about, say blatantly, we will never be neutral on the Union. And they blatantly say that our duty as a government is to protect the political, territorial, and economic integrity of the United Kingdom. So, I mean, these guys are going nowhere. So you have this thing, they talk about this border poll, but it's like a comet, it's like Halley's Comet. It'll show up every once in a while and it gets real bright and then it just disappears again, but it never quite gets there. You know what I mean? So you have all this going on, and it's pacified people, and it's kept people quiet, and which I suppose is a good thing in some ways, but it's not really dealing with with the core of the issue, which is, does Irish constitutional authority reside with the Irish people or does it not? And it doesn't. It
Mm.
resides with the British government in the north anyway, and they also have a big say what goes on in the south. Another thing I'd like to say, and you asked me earlier, Colin, why I wrote the book, and another reason was to challenge another narrative that we were fighting a war just to unite Ireland. That you hear this all the time. You know, the Provost want to unite Ireland, and that's true. But you see, Ireland was only partitioned 102 years ago. You
Mm.
know, England invaded Ireland 800 years ago. For the vast majority of Irish history and for the vast majority of Irish rebellions, Ireland was one political unit. It's only been partitioned. So, you know, there was a rising, and Ireland was partitioned in 1920, the
Mhm.
Government of Ireland Act. And, you know, we had a rising in 1916, you know, the famous Easter Rising in 1916. Ireland wasn't partitioned in 1916. So what was
Mhm.
that rising about if the struggle was just to unite Ireland? Or when the United Irishmen were formed in 1791, the United Irishmen were formed, you know, people often talk about the Catholic IRA, but the Irish Republican movement was founded exclusively by Protestants, Protestants of the Enlightenment, you know, not
Mhm.
Protestants who saw, you know, who took their political ideology from the plantation, but from the Enlightenment. And of the 28 founding members of the United Irishmen in 1791, 26 were Northern Presbyterians and 2 were Anglicans, Wolfe Tone and Thomas Davis, and uh, Wolfe Tone and not Thomas Davis, but oh, the man from God knows where. My mind's a blank. I'm sorry, but anyway, the point I'm making is that all the founding members of the Irish Republican movement were Protestant. And when they formed the United Irishmen, what do they mean by uniting Ireland? Ireland wasn't partitioned. They meant uniting Irishmen across the sectarian divide,
Mm.
uniting them as citizens of one republic. And that is the basic premise of Irish republicanism. But under the Good Friday Agreement, yes, they're talking about uniting Ireland, but they're saying you can still be British, you can still be Irish, you can still, you know, if you want to, in what's present now Northern Ireland, you can still be a British citizen. Well, I mean, if you can still be a British citizen, how is that unity? If you can give your allegiance to a foreign country, even though you've been in this country for 400 years, you know, so you know, these are major issues that Republicans have with the Good Friday Agreement. Like I said, you know, I don't know any Republicans who are against the peace. It's the process that's the problem. You
Right.
know, yeah.
Well, I've spoken to people over the past few years. I've heard from supporters of Jerry Adams and Sinn Féin. I've heard of those who are deathly opposed to Jerry Adams and Sinn Féin. What is your take on all of that? Has Jerry Adams and Sinn Féin done anything good for the Irish?
Well, I mean, have they done anything good? Um, they've done pretty good for themselves. A lot of them.
Well,
They're very
that's
well.
the yeah, that's the argument.
Yeah, a lot of them are very wealthy. And Jerry Adams, he's a very intelligent guy. Now he's not very good at getting the Brits out of Ireland, but he's brilliant at getting in charge of an organization and staying there for a lifetime. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah.
And I believe, you know, I don't believe that you can defeat the British government from a position of safety. I don't believe that. So I believe if you're living in the north and you're saying you're trying to get the British out of Ireland, I believe if you're a real threat to that, you're not going to be living at home like a lot of these guys have been doing for a long time. So you know, I have my suspicions about people like Jerry Adams and Martin McGuinness being basically a type of protected species. You know, not saying that they're agents, but that they are on a parallel path with British strategy, which is, you know, pacify the North, throw people the bone of, well, there's this notional United Ireland down the road if you meet this certain criteria. But of course, the Brits saying, we'll decide what the criteria are. And also, we're not going to tell you what they are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you know, they're bringing people in to storm it there. They're giving them big wages. You know, a lot of people are, you know, just are bought off. I mean, but this is nothing new. I mean, you know, I think as far as I know, there's 196 countries in the world recognized by the United Nations as countries. The British have been in or established military presence at some stage in 171 of them. I mean, these people are good at getting in places, and you know, they built an empire. They fought to retain that empire. I mean, they're, you know, they're world-renowned experts in counterinsurgency, had taken on, guerrilla movements, and they're just really good at it. And they really, wrote the template for getting the civil and military infrastructure together to defeat an insurgency, which, they totally defeated us in I believe, in Ireland. I mean, in 1987, a good friend of mine and 7 other IRA volunteers were killed at Loughgall. Jim Lynam was killed there, and they were killed by an SCS ambush in Loughgall, again, informers, and 8 were shot dead. And I remember at the funeral, Jerry Adams said that Loughgall will be the tombstone of British rule in Ireland. Well, now the IRA are buried and the Brits are still here. You know,
Mhm.
Another very thing that I think Sinn Féin has done, which is very dangerous from a Republican perspective, is they now refer to Unionists as the British presence, and Unionists often refer to them as the British presence. But the British presence for a Republican is not Unionist. The British presence is the presence of Britain's claim to jurisdiction in Ireland and the civil and military apparatus that gives that effect. I mean, England invaded Ireland hundreds of years before the plantation of Ulster. There was no union, and there were no unionists when England was here for hundreds of years. So what was their excuse then? So this nonsense that the Brits are only here to protect unionists, it's nonsense. I mean, unionists are the excuse, but they're not the reason. The reason is Ireland is an important strategic, place on their western flank, and they will always have a strategic interest to be here. And as a Irish Republican, we have a strategic interest, to achieve our own national freedom and
Mhm.
democracy. So but they're bigger and stronger. We were fighting. We were fighting the 5th largest economy in the world, one of the best armies in the world, very professional. I have to hand it to the British intelligence services. They are brilliant at infiltrating organizations and turning them. And I would never underestimate them. Never underestimate the British at being able to defeat insurgency from within. I mean, they've done it time and again. And just not to cut across you, to come, just say real quickly, I was recently reading the book about the American Revolution, and the British did try to bring in a sort of compromise to the American Congress at the time. I can't remember what they called it, but if the Americans had gone for it, it would have been a type of home rule, but with British sovereignty would have remained intact in the United States. Now, had they got there and got that split, it would have really divided the American Revolution. Now, luckily for George Washington, it didn't work, but had it worked, and they tried it. So, I mean, this goes back hundreds of years. The British, like I said, through their empire, they're really good at this stuff.
Well, you have to explain because the pictures that you gave me will be shown in the interview.
Yeah.
The jacket.
Oh yeah, yeah. Whitey Bulger gave me that jacket, and I'm not sure if that's the jacket he was wearing when I met him, but it looks like the jacket he was wearing. I actually still have that jacket, believe it or not. Uh, doesn't fit me now, but for some reason he gave me that jacket, and I can't quite remember. I must have worn it home on a flight, and would have left it in a flat where I stayed. And then when I was arrested later on, I'd have asked somebody would bring me the jacket into the jail, and I'll wear it on business and that. No, but that's definitely his jacket. Yeah, yeah, he gave me that. Yeah,
That's a good story. That's a good story.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't have anything like that from any of the famous people I've known. Although, George Best did buy me a pint. So,
Did he? Oh, God.
yeah, and he signed a photo for me, so that was great.
Yeah.
Um, well, what is your life like now?
Well, I'm married. I have 2 teenage kids. One is doing. My daughter's doing the Leaving Cert, which is like the last year in high school in America,
Hmm.
and she's hoping to go to university next year to do drama and history. And my son is just finishing his first year in Trinity College in Dublin. He's doing medieval history, and I have my wife Debbie, and I mean, I'm very happy in my home life. All's well that ends well. On a personal level, I can't complain, but on a political level, like, I'm devastated that we went through so much, and some people inflicted so much, which they never would have done except for the achievement of a true national democracy within an all-Ireland republic, and we haven't got there. And people, Sinn Féin will tell you, "Oh, we're getting there, we're getting there, we're getting there." They've been saying that for 100 years, stepping stone. But I mean, I don't believe we're getting there, and I believe that recent documents put out by the British, and the British are saying, basically that they have no intention of getting us there. You know, So now, you see, it's a hard thing to argue because people then come around and automatically presume you're talking about, you know, resuming armed struggle or something like that. I'm absolutely not. But, I think democracy could work here, but there's no real National Democratic Republican Party in this country anymore. Republicanism has been shattered into 100 pieces, like 100 different panes of glass, and each piece thinks it's the true Republican movement. So it's very hard to gel that together. But I mean, we have the numbers. I mean, like I said, if there was a 32 county vote tomorrow, simple question: do you believe Irish constitutional authority should reside with the Irish people or with the British Crown? I believe the overwhelming majority of people in 30 of 32 counties would say, well, it should reside with the Irish people. But you see, we're not going to have that vote. We're not allowed to have that vote, and we can't have that vote. So we have a situation now in the north. I'm not too sure how much a lot of your listeners will be aware of the minutiae of all this, but they talk about people in Ireland voted for the Good Friday Agreement. The reality of it is, people in the 6 counties of Northern Ireland voted for the multi-party agreement, but in the south they voted to amend Articles 2 and 3 of the Constitution from a claim to Irish sovereignty to a notional aspiration that if everybody can agree at some stage, then it'd be a nice thing to have, but it's notional. So, and it shows, I think, that the level of skill the British negotiators showed, that the only uh, um, constitutional requirement from the Good Friday Agreement, the actual requirement, was that the dilution of Articles 2 and 3 of the Irish Constitution to a notional aspiration from a commitment to unity. Everything else in the agreement, it's not a requirement. It's notional. It's airy fairy. It's happy clappy. Stuff. So I think the Brits pretty well ran rings around everybody. But a lot of people, they were happy with that because they were being bought into the system. Uh, they've got good jobs. Pensions. Not sitting in prison. You
Hmm.
know, and a lot of people just simply bought off.
Well, what's the what is the IRA like today? What is today's IRA? I know it's nothing like it was in the 80s, 70s, or even before that.
Yeah. Well, I honestly wouldn't know because I'm not involved with them. And there's different groups calling themselves the IRA. So I'm as confused as a lot of people. I mean, I was in the
Yeah.
provisional IRA, which was the mainstream IRA, very, very well, even though the training wasn't great, we had a great engineering department. And, we were able to punch above our weight a lot of the time. And we gave the Brits a run for their money for a long time.
Mm.
But the thing about it is, the present IRA, I mean, or what's calling themselves the IRA, I mean, there's nothing happening. They don't seem to be able to get an operation together without everybody getting arrested every time they're clearly completely infiltrated. Uh, I wouldn't certainly is not something I'd recommend any young fellow joining because I think it'd be a total waste of time and waste their lives. Um, th- 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 the way things happen in Ireland is through events. Now, I don't know what events down the road will ever happen to change the present status quo, but it's like, for example, the 1916 Rising really happened because World War One started in 1914, and the British suspended home rule,
Hmm.
and people got so frustrated they had a rising. And I'm not saying that anything is going to happen again, but I will say, I know a lot of people don't like to hear this, but this isn't a peace. This is a pacification. You have peace when you don't have any root cause for violence. But in Ireland, we still have British jurisdiction. We still have that sectarian division in society that the British used to manipulate, that they injected into our society. They injected it here. I mean, the King Charles, when he was in May, when he was the coronation last year, he had to swear 3 oaths to the Protestant Church, and he's head of the Anglican Church. He's head of he's the only head of state in Europe that has a religious coronation, and he's the only under the English monarchy specifically. You can't be a Catholic and be head of state.
Hmm.
I mean, and they accuse the Irish of being sectarian. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's them
Hmm.
injected that here. As a Republican, we want rid of that sectarianism. We want rid of that English presence. We want to get rid of that sectarian dynamic and replace it with a joint civic identity. I mean, I grew up in America. My God, Catholic, Protestant, who cares? You know, and that's the way we want it here.
Yeah.
And it
Well,
never
this,
will be like that. Whether Brits are in here manipulating the situation, manipulating those divisions,
well, let's,
divide and rule, how they work. Yeah, sorry.
no, that's okay. That's okay. This has been great. Well, let's talk about the book one more time. Let's
Yeah.
talk about how long did it take you to write and where can people get it?
Well, see, I originally wrote a novel, and it took me about 3 years, and a lot of it was based on fact, as most novels are. But when I was speaking to the American publisher, he was saying, "Look, nobody ever heard of you, and fiction doesn't sell that great. And look at your story. Look at your IRA, Marines, Whitey Bulger. Come on." But I couldn't imagine. I mean, I literally never crossed my mind to write a book about myself because I come from a background where you keep your head down and keep secrets. So you don't stick your head up and give them. But I went around and canvassed a few people, and they were very encouraging. People I trusted, whose opinions I respected. So I decided that I would write this book, and so it took me a year. I wrote it in a year, you know,
Mm.
and it's done quite well. It's been out a year now. It's done quite well. It's just come out an audiobook as well, worldwide, and um, I had a guy on to me today. He's interested in making a documentary about it, and so even a year later, I'm still getting, uh, uh, you know, feedback from the book and things like that. So I'm happy enough. I'm going to write something else. I haven't totally decided yet what, but I'll continue. So what else am I going to do?
All right, sir. Well, simplify to you.
Semper Fi. Thank you very, very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it too. Thank you, sir.
Take care, Colin. Take care.
You
Bye
too.
bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Thanks for watching today's episode of Forgotten History. If you like this episode, please consider becoming a channel member or joining our Patreon page. This would help us offset the ever-increasing cost of production. As always, please like, share, and comment. And if you have any show ideas, please contact us, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Until next time.